Auburn finished 4th last year in KenPom, top 10 in both offense and defense. Man, did they smoke people during the SEC. Win the SEC tournament, but then you lose to Yale, which taints an otherwise really fantastic season for Bruce Pearl down there at Auburn. But good news is Johni Broom's back. A lot of other guys are back, and you inject some more talent. So Auburn should definitely be in the mix of the top of the SEC again this year. Christian and Nick here with Nathan King, who covers Auburn for Auburn Undercover on the 247 Network. Nathan, thank you for joining us. Tell us, that loss was obviously tough to deal with, but how has the program been able to use that as fuel to, have an even better season this year?
Yeah, absolutely. Bruce Pearl started mentioning it like a week after it happened. He was on, I guess, TNT's coverage and started kind of joking on himself for losing to Yale. Yeah, it's something they've talked about multiple times this offseason. And really, this is a program that's felt like, they look back at that Final Four season in 2019. Obviously, that was the high point of the Bruce Pearl era. But there have been, other moments since then where they've had great finishes, won a few SEC titles since then, had a lot of really good players, but they're still looking to they haven't been back to the second weekend since then. So they feel like that is sort of the last opportunity, or the last, sort of hurdle of being a modern, top 15, top 10-ish basketball program over the last several years, is to push farther in the NCAA tournament. As I'm sure we'll get to, they've got as good of a roster, as complete of a roster as they've had under Bruce Pearl, and are obviously looking to make good on their SEC tournament run last year and make it deeper in the tournament this year.
Yeah, we talk about Johni Broome. This is a guy, in my opinion, who could really be the player of the year in college basketball this year, because there's no one more dominant on both ends of the floor at his position. So what can we expect from him this year? What does it mean for him to come back? How close was he to leaving? And my last question is, I was looking at the roster last year in the minutes. This is a guy who only played 24.8 minutes per game last year. And I get it, like Auburn, has good depth with Dylan Cardwell, some other guys. But, like, how did he not play at least 30 minutes or more?
Yeah, they pride themselves on that depth. It comes from being a defensive-minded team. That's, for as flashy of players as they've had of late in the Pearl era, it all comes back to defense. And, yeah, for Johni Broome, he was closer to leaving after his first year at Auburn, actually, than he was the second year. He was a guy, if y'all remember, he went out, he earned an NBA Combine invite from that G League camp, which means that you go out there and you perform really well in front of scouts. His parents told me that he had a couple late second round offers, excuse me. Obviously those aren't concrete, but you get teams in the late second round, they're saying, hey, we're thinking about using on you. It was really tough for him to decide to come back. This time around, and this is the benefit of NIL in the modern state of college sports, he was obviously a massive priority for this Auburn program. To get him back, and he felt like, he had unfinished business. He felt like last season, you mentioned how dominant of a player he was. He felt like that was the version of himself he always thought he could be. Auburn changed a lot of their offense around, and that was actually how they were able to get him back last year. Really started spreading stuff out, went more 5-out last year, and he started controlling the ball, around the perimeter more, and that led to more three-point opportunities. And that was just one area of his game last year where he's a big man who started making three balls, and that's a really, really dangerous thing, not only for his scoring, opened up the rest of this team to kind of flourish on the offensive side of the ball. It's one of the better offensive teams last year of the Pearl era. But yeah, I'm with you. Could be one of the best players in the country this year. I would call him preseason SEC player of the year, most likely. It's rare in college basketball you get a returning All-American. And he's now the third All-American of the Pearl era there at Auburn. Yeah, just dynamic on both ends of the floor. And I think he really, silenced a lot of doubts about his game last year. I think was kind of one of the biggest points. He got better at free throw shooting, got better at three-point shooting. He's been, a guy that people, a little bit more of a finesse big man rather than a physical big man. I think he started to show last year, hey, that's not a bad thing. Like, they can scheme around him on offense. And then, I think he was top 5 in block percentage. Just a fantastic defender as well. So when you look at the numbers from last year, really throughout the season in terms of offense, defense, box score efficiency, really it was only Donovan Clingan was the only other more efficient big man in all of college basketball than Johni Broome. So obviously that's really high praise for him. And they're not going to build the whole plane out of him this year because, like you said, they've got a lot of other depth, but he obviously is the anchor for this team.
Love Johni. Love seeing guys start at Moorhead or just start at the mid-major level and then really just flourish as stars. You mentioned the free throw percentage taking a jump, still at 62%. Would like to see that. I think that's probably arguably more important than his three-point percentage, but he's a lot of fun to watch. He's the anchor of this team where, the doubt has come in past years, and this year I think there's reasons to be more optimistic about it, is the guard play. Because last year you had talent in the backcourt. It's just been, and there's been games, especially at home, where it's like, oh, the guards are playing well. They're making good decisions, hitting threes. Like Auburn's such a wagon. But there have just been too many times where it's, and I don't want to put it all on KD Johnson, because I mean, guys like whether it's Wendell Green or whether it's Aiden Holloway, like just not good enough guard play. Just not good enough guard play. Call it decision making, call it 3-point shooting. Those, I guess, are the two things that stand out. But dogs defensively, just not getting enough done offensively to be consistent. And you bring in JP Pegues from Furman, a really good player, guy with NCAA tournament experience, 18, 4, and 5 last year. And Miles Kelly's a guy I really like from Georgia Tech, a guy who's always had a lot of attention on him because he's been on a bad team and is a really good scorer and a guy that can heat up. And when all the eyes were on him, has still been decently efficient. I mean, he was not efficient last year, shot 37% from the field, but we've seen him be efficient, have efficient games. Those two guys specifically, how do you expect them to integrate into this Auburn system? And do you think they'll be able to defensively do what Bruce Pearl wants? Because offensively, I think they're definitely better players than what you've had the past couple of years.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of, the guard play on defense has not lacked at all. You bring up KD Johnson. He was a guy who, brings some frustration sometimes with his offensive play, but for every one of those moments, he's a menace on defense. And so, Wendell Green was a decent defender. Trey Donaldson was a good defender for them last year. He was a really important part of that bench group, getting up and down the floor as fast as they did. But I think you're exactly right in that it always just felt like there was the other half of the coin just kind of missing for these guards. They were really, Wendell Green was a second team all SEC point guard. Like, they had good play at those guard spots. They just felt like it hasn't been strung together, particularly in the postseason, in NCAA tournament time, and against really good teams on the road. Like you mentioned, at home, this team they've just found something with that home court advantage. Starting with JP Pegues, you mentioned he was their number one point guard target, guy who comes over from Furman, really veteran, really experienced player. Auburn hasn't had a guy like that in a while, really since Jared Harper, maybe, of like calming presence at point guard, just kind of a floor general. Aiden Holloway and Trey Donaldson, like, they were pretty good last year, but Bruce Pearl brought it up even during the season. He said, we got to get better guard play, got to get more consistency out of the point guard spot. Maybe with a guy like that, who's a first team all conference player at the mid-major level, maybe you start to see that consistency. You mentioned Miles Kelly as well. I mean, he's kind of my under the radar guy. I don't even know if you can call him that, a two-time leading scorer at Georgia Tech, but he is a guy that I think fits so well into this system. Bruce Pearl has called him at practice so far the best three-point shooter on the team, and this is a team with a lot of offensive options. And so I'm really interested to kind of see how he fits into this backcourt mix. The 2 and the 3 in Auburn's system is basically the same. Chad Baker, Mazzara. I'm really interested to see how those two guys go together. But yeah, they're looking for more offensive consistency out of this backcourt. And on defense, look, he's going to get it out of him. This is Bruce Pearl and his system. Obviously, it starts on the defensive end of the floor. And he said right now their defense is ahead of their offense in preseason practice. That's where he likes this program to be, because he sort of thinks, well, you got Janai Broom, you've got some veteran players. Offense is going to work itself out. So far, the defense seems to be on track, but you're exactly right. They have to be a top 10 defensive team, top 15. That's where their success has started under Pearl.
For those listening, JP is the guy who nailed the shot versus Virginia and round one the NCAA tournament like 2 years ago. And you probably didn't follow him much last year, but he did it like 2 or 3 times, hit buzzer beaters. Like, the guy is cold-blooded, but he's really humble, which, like you said, I think it'll bring a steadiness to this Auburn team, which what they need. Because like you guys have mentioned, like, KD's been a little bit out of control, cocky at times, and JP's not like that at all. I've watched a ton of Furman because honestly they're one of my favorite mid-majors. But 2 other guys that I want to hear about, one being the freshman, Tahad Pettiford. I've heard really good things out of him, and what can we expect from him year one? And then Denver Jones. This was a guy I was pretty high on coming to Auburn. This will be his second season out of Auburn. What can we expect out of him this year? And can he take a leap, or will he still have like the same role as the previous season?
Yeah, we talked to Tahad yesterday. I think a guy who fits well in this system, just because he's just explosion is just the name of the game for him. Bruce Pearl has this saying that any transition opportunity is better than a set play, and he never backs down from that at all times. And so Todd Pettiford, we were talking to him yesterday, and he was like, that is music to my ears, because he likes to create his own transition opportunities. He's a guy who's extremely explosive. The interesting thing about Tahad is that ever since he signed, well, not ever since like March, when Bruce started looking ahead to the next season, he didn't want to pigeonhole him at point guard. Like he's 5'10", 5'11". He's not a big guard, but Bruce was saying, maybe Auburn plays him more off ball, at least at the start of his career. Point guard carries a lot of responsibilities in Bruce Pearl's system, really in any system in college basketball. Probably he didn't want that to stunt his growth. I wonder if some of that came off of the Aiden Holloway fallout too. Like Holloway just seemed way in over his head last season. Guy who was an incredible shooter in the high school level just sort of dropped off in terms of his offense. And so I think Bruce Pearl may be looking at that and saying, let's just give Tahad more scoring opportunities. Turn around, flash forward to the beginning of preseason camp, and Bruce kind of changed his tune a little bit. He said Tahad showed him in the summer that he was capable of running the offense, and so we're going to see him in that point guard role. We're going to see him in that off-ball role. Really, just I expect him to be a guy. I mentioned Trey Donaldson, how he kind of ran that bench mob last year, just sort of an explosive, athletic guy. Tahad maybe has a little bit higher of a ceiling with that group. I expect him to be the guy that runs with those backups. You're trying to rim run with a guy like Dylan Cardwell. I think he's a good candidate to do that. I think they'll have good synergy together. And speaking of point guard, I mean, you mentioned Denver Jones. He's been playing more point guard this offseason. And I say more point guard, exponentially more. He barely played at all last year. He really only moonlit at the position when Aiden Holloway was injured. Bruce Pearl just likes his command of the floor. Now, JP Pegues is going to be the starter. But I wonder if Denver Jones might be the backup. I still think he'll be the starting two. In terms of a jump this year, I think that is what Auburn is expecting from Denver Jones. You look at his numbers, better part of, I think, the last month of last season, it was like 47% from three and extremely low turnovers. I mean, he was a flamethrower in those games. I think you might see more scoring opportunities for him. But the big thing with Denver, and this doesn't show up on stat sheets as much, he is one of their best lockdown defenders, perimeter defenders, that they've had in a long time. He's probably the best on-ball defender since Bryce Brown for them. And so he was a guy that when he came over from FIU, there were question marks about his defense. Bruce said he really pushed him on defense, and he flourished in a big way. So I think getting him back on the outside, getting Janai Broome back on the inside is absolutely massive for their defensive game plan this season.
Yeah, and just to echo the points you guys have made about like pace with the guards, right? Like when Auburn's guards were looking good last year, it's when, especially at home, when the defense is so elite and the transition games come and the offense is flowing, like that's when the guards look good. But it was in the moments, whether it was on the road or just when the defense wasn't playing at a super, super high level, where it did get a little bit grittier in the half court. That's when we need someone other than Broome who can create consistently. And like, even like the Jabari Smith team, like had like a guy outside the post, even though he could post up a little bit. You get what I'm saying? Like just having more guys who can settle the pace, experienced, and can get a good shot when things aren't, the transition chaos that Auburn loves. And man, this starting lineup is old. This whole team is old. You've got to meet a couple of freshmen, but like senior, redshirt, senior, grad student, freshman, fifth year, senior, couple freshmen. That's the roster. Like there's no sophomores or juniors on the roster. And like, that's fun. And I think the defense we know is going to be super high level. And you mentioned the versatility of Denver Jones, Kelly. You've got multiple older ball handlers. A lot to like about this team. And I think the 3-point shooting should definitely be better as well. What was the next thing I wanted to ask? I guess we haven't talked about Chaney Johnson, and I kind of want to hear more about Dylan Cardwell. Other than Broome, how do you expect the rest of the front court to take shape this year? And who do you think will be leading the way minutes wise?
Yeah, I mean, Jalen Williams is tough to replace. There's no way around it. A hyper efficient scorer. He's the winningest player in Auburn history. So a guy who brought a lot of experience. Yeah, Chaney's got a lot of tools. Just an ultra athletic guy. He blocked a shot with his head last year. So he's definitely a guy that runs really well in transition for them. How does he take on a starting role? Bruce Pearl has teased the idea, what if Janai Broome plays a little bit of 4 this year? I don't personally know how much that's going to stick because Janai is such a dominant college center. Is he a center in the NBA level? I don't know. He's probably going to be a great overseas center, but I just think that has worked so well for them and it gave them so much balance having him at the 5. Chaney Johnson, I think if you look at him and you're saying that is maybe the biggest question mark of your starting group, you're in a pretty good spot. Like if that is your guy that you're wondering how he's going to, take a next step as a starter, I think you're in a decent spot. Minutes wise, they're going to help him and try to offset some of that. They bring in Jaheim Hudson. Now they tried to go out and get a splashy transfer at the 4 spot. They brought in RJ Godfrey from Clemson. They brought in Dylan Mitchell was the one from Texas. I was like, oof, I mean, that would be crazy if they could land him. But again, the NIL priority with Broome just ended up, they took a guy in Hudson. Now, Hudson's not a bad player by any means, but he's more of a rebounding defender, kind of fill in that gap with the minutes. Dylan Cardwell at the 5, he's Mr. Auburn. He's been here a long time. He's now 5th-year senior. Guy who brings a lot of energy, a lot of leadership. Guy who's basically, they call him Cap. He's basically the team captain as you're looking at this team. And really, I mean, he took one of the biggest steps forward last year. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but he went from a guy that I thought was out of position on defense a decent amount on the perimeter, made some kind of boneheaded plays sometimes on offense where he was going with the ball. He tried to post up on guys and little floaters and stuff. It's just not his game. I thought last year was a lot smarter of a player, and that really, really helped that second unit. And so you asked about Dylan Cardwell. His main role on this team is, hey, get in there with the backups, block a lot of shots, get a lot of rebounds, get a couple dunks, get the momentum going. And then they'll kind of continue from there. But yeah, I mean, the front court it's got a dominant player and it's got some other guys who maybe aren't so dominant. And so how does a guy like Chaney Johnson progress? Look, he's ultra athletic. If he can tap into some of that, that's going to be really, really interesting. And look, we haven't even talked about Chad Baker-Mazara. I think the number 3 returning scorer on the team, maybe guy who took a big jump once he started becoming a starter for them late in the year. Maybe you see him playing some small ball 4. They got a lot of options in the front court. It just makes things so much easier when we'd be having much different conversations if they didn't get Janai Broome back. There would be a lot more question marks. Makes it a lot easier when you're like, you got one of the 3 or 4 best players in the country at center. He's gonna make sure things run just fine.
Talking about Chaney Mazara, like, man, just seeing him get ejected like a few minutes into the game last year versus Yale, like, it's such a blow, man. Like, and I love Bruce Pearl. Like, I love him. One of my favorite coaches ever used to coach under Bruce Pearl years ago. So I like Bruce Pearl, have a lot of respect for him. But besides 2019, when they had that nice Final Four run, he hasn't made it past the round of 32. And, like, this is a team last year who had the number 1 effective field goal percent D in the country, the number 1 2-point percent D in the country. Like, there's really no excuse to lose to a team like Yale in round 1. So it's like, and I know, like, there's a lot of variance and one-off games in the NCAA tournament, so there's a lot of luck-driven stuff. But, like, I'd be shocked if this team doesn't make it past the round of 32 this season. Like, yeah. Is that how you see it as well? Do you have anything, like, do you think it's just a luck thing come the NCAA tournament, just guys not prepared? Like, what do you think it is? Because he's had some really good teams, and, like, this team, I'd be shocked if they don't make the Sweet 16.
Yeah, I mean, look, the pressure's on in that regard. We talked about all these other elements of the Pearl era for them have been, honestly unprecedented. The Auburn basketball historically is a bottom feeder in the SEC, and it has been for most of its history. Few seasons here and there, a few guys here and there, like Charles Barkley and Doc Robinson, but like they just don't string together solid basketball teams. I think that is the feeling going into this year, particularly because of how last season ended. I mean, you guys were probably the same. I was in Nashville, covering that run for them to the tournament championship game and winning it. And besides, how they were winning those games, just besides their record and whatever, besides their seed, watching that Auburn team, you're like, this is one of the best teams in the country heading into the tournament, and they're getting hot at the right time. I thought if they matched up with UConn in the Sweet 16, like, not, winner wins the national title, but like the winner of that game, if Auburn were to beat UConn, I legitimately would have been like, okay, this team can win the national championship. And so it was that kind of momentum feeling. Maybe you hit some of that against Yale and you were feeling a little big for your britches. Going to Spokane, that sucked for them. Like, that was just not fun. It was a little bit of payback from hosting number 1 overall seed Houston the previous year in your backyard in Birmingham. So obviously that makes a little bit of sense. But yeah, I mean, I think it is second weekend or bust right now, feeling for this team. Well, we'll see how things play out. But I just wonder, and Christian, you mentioned the number of seniors on this team. Bruce Pearl mentioned the other day, like, he's got 10 seniors. Like, I'm not saying, this is their last opportunity, but there's a reason he went out and he was like, yeah, put Houston on the schedule. Yeah, put Purdue on the schedule. Yeah, Duke in the ACCS. Like, there is a reason that Bruce Pearl is saying, let's load up, let's play the best schedule in the history of the program. He feels like he has a team that can do it. Now, are they going to lose some of those games? Absolutely. But as teams like Alabama have shown, I think it's honestly kind of the blueprint you've seen from down the road. Like, teams like Alabama have shown you don't have to go win every single one of those games if you play a marquee non-con schedule. Auburn's been hurt by that recently. They were hurt by that last year by a weak non-conference schedule. And so, I mean, the feeling right now, and we talked about it a little bit before we got rolling, like, maybe they don't win the SEC. They probably don't, just because if really right now you take one team or the field in the SEC, regardless of who you're talking about, you're probably taking the field. Like there's just so many opportunities, so many teams. They're going to be really, really good. But I just think the experience, the upgrades that they made at crucial spots on the roster. Todd Pettiford's a 5-star. Like those don't grow on trees, and Auburn just kind of cycles through them these days, and just it's no big deal. They have the talent, they have the experience. This could be the most anticipated team ever at Auburn, which is absolutely saying something. But we'll see how they do. They've got a lot of tests early out of the gate, and I think they're going to learn a lot about themselves right off the bat. They go to Houston, basically a road game. It's technically a neutral site. Play a road game at Houston in the second game of the season, so they'll learn a lot about themselves really quickly.
What a schedule! I didn't realize it was that tough.
Crazy.
You make a good point about your friends down the road. Alabama was 6-5 last year. Around Christmas time, they were 8th in KenPom. The computers knew that they were still really good playing that schedule. And to compare them to Alabama a little bit more, I think what Bama showed in that Final Four run was like similar to Auburn. Bama like has a certain style. They had an identity. They had a certain style of play they had. And it was, could they even though their defensive metrics were so bad, like situationally, could they turn up the jets when they needed to? And like they did. And like, I think that's what's so exciting about this Auburn team is at home, they're going to do their Auburn thing and they're going to beat people, and they're going to be really tough to beat at home in the SEC play. But now when you go on the road, it's like the stuff we just talked about, just of the guard play and just the experience. Like there's a lot of reasons to believe that there's different ways Auburn can beat you now. And I think that bodes really well for them. And I think they will absolutely be a force at the top of the SEC. Any final nuggets of just anything you've heard this summer? Any quotes from a player, coach, of anything interesting you want to leave us on?
Yeah, I mean, y'all pretty much touched on everything. Glad we brought up Miles Kelly as much as we did. I just think he's a guy. I'm not sure how much my internet hurt that portion of the conversation, but I think he's a guy that fits so well. Like he might not be a starter, just because you have Denver at the 2, you have Chad at the 3, like you have those guys already, entrenched in your system. But this bench group could be a combination of Todd Pettiford, Miles Kelly, Chris Moore is a 5th-year senior that did a lot of good things for them in March. Kind of that everybody's got a glue guy, and it's kind of a cliche, but like he truly does do that for them. And Dylan Cardwell is the guy who's experienced as well. Like they have that bench group to go in there and make an impact. Yeah, I just think it's a team that's going to be predicated on defense once again. It's going to be relying on Janai Broom. Not only, he doesn't necessarily even need to improve. He just needs to do exactly what he did last year, and they'll be in a really good spot. I'm with you about the road games and taking this stuff situationally against good teams, not only in the non-con, but you look at their SEC schedule, like it's brutal as well. And everybody plays everybody in the SEC. So that's not what I'm saying, but like them going on the road in consecutive games, who they play on the road, what time in the season. And it's going to be a team that I think might have their fair share of losses in January. But like you said, we'll probably look up at KenPom and be like, oh, this is the 5th best team in the country. I mean, they play like Iowa State to open things up. And we haven't even touched on Maui. I mentioned the whole schedule. Well, good Lord, as unbelievable. They could play UConn and Iowa State there and UNC. And so, I mean, it's an unbelievable slate for them. I think Auburn fans have gotten a little smarter, not to take offense to anybody, but I just think it's a football program historically. Over the past several years, they've sort of learned, hey, it's okay to lose basketball games. Like everybody's going to lose them. They're actually going to lose a lot of them. I think maybe that's come to a head in a good way for them to go into this season saying you need to pay more attention to how they play versus what their record is. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be a great team. It's going to be a great year in the SEC, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Awesome stuff, man. Thank you for joining us, Nathan. You were a great guest, and it's going to be a lot of fun down there in Auburn. That's for sure.
Thank y'all.